Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction, and I would like also to thank the organizing committee for creating this space and also for allowing me to participate in it. In this time, I will expose my research about Egyptian women agency of their own past toward fairy archaeology. Um, the presentation is structured in five big parts: the problematic framework, the local context, the methodology, the main results, and the conclusions. To introduce the topic of my research, I think it's necessary to briefly situate archaeology in Egypt, because archaeology in this country developed largely within colonial frameworks, which shaped both the origin of the discipline and the ways in which research and professional practice have been carried out. These dynamics have historically marginalized local communities within the archaeological field. At the same time, I think we should consider the social context, the social cultural context of these communities, where patriarchal structure have limited women access to higher education and professionalization in fields such as archaeology. The combination of colonial and patriarchal dynamics has therefore produced particularly strong invisibilization of Egyptian women within the archaeological field. However, this invisibilization contrasts with a very different reality in which women coexist on a daily basis with archaeological materiality and with the pharaonic past as a part of the local of the cultural landscape. This research was conducted on the west bank of Luxor. This territory is particularly relevant because it concentrates one of the largest assemblage of archaeological remains in all of Egypt. And in this space, tourism, archaeological practice, and long-standing local coexistence with archaeological materiality converge together. Um, the West Bank of Luxor presents a long history of coexistence, reuse, and resignification of the archaeological materiality. A particularly illustrative case is one of the village that I studied, Old Gurna, which was built over an ancient pharaonic necropolis, reusing tombs as domestic spaces. For more than a century, this community was accused of looting, of trafficking antiquities, generating strong tensions with the institutional archaeology that eventually culminate in the state-led displacement of the population and the destruction of the village. Today, archaeology remains one of the main economic activities in the area. However, the local participation is largely restricted to unskilled labor, such as excavation workers, and the field remains strongly gender segregated, with a very limited female participation. Within this context, the general contribution of the study is to reflect on how archaeological narratives are constructed and on the role of the local conception of the past play in contemporary archaeological practice. The main research question was, what role does the pharaonic past play within the communities of the West Bank of Luxor, and more specifically within the women's experience and narratives. From this question, three big main objectives: to analyze women's relationship with this pharaonic past in their everyday lives, to identify the spaces, the practice, the narratives through which the past is transmitted and resignified, and to reflect on the implication of this funding for community-based archaeology. To address this research, a critical bibliographic review was first conducted identifying significant gaps and absences regarding the local conception of the past and the role of the women within them. However, the central pillar of the research was ethnographic fieldwork, consisted of participant observation and 21 interviews. Although the intensive fieldwork lasted 3 months, the results were made possible with years of prior coexistence with the communities. As a result of the fieldwork, a set of practices and narratives structures around the pharaonic past and its archaeological materiality was documented. This practice formed an active part of the local belief system. Some of these practices are carried both women by both women and men. One example of these practices, those one around Reset. Reset is a supernatural entity that acts as a guardian of the pharaonic materiality, and a lot of rituals and strategies are articulated around this entity in order to gain access to the antiquities that it protects. However, a particular significant part of the documented practice are those performed exclusively by women. Among them, we can find practice related to evil eye. In this case, material element produced on the evil eyes, such as writing spells on a paper, as you can see in the screen, might be deposited in an ancient Egyptian space, such as tombs, in order to ensure their effectiveness. But and we can also find practices related to Arabic word. It's mushahira. Mushahira is something understood as an affliction of the soul that might manifest physically through infertility, lack of breast milk, or illness during an infant postpartum quarantine period. To reverse this condition of mushahira, rituals are performed that involve visiting pharaonic tombs or temples where water, space, and the archaeological materiality acquire a therapeutic and spiritual meaning. In this sense, archaeological space are not conceived merely as remains of the past, but also place endowed with agency in the present. All these practices, deeply rooted in the local belief system and in the collective memories, position the pharaonic past in a central cultural and spiritual place within the community. However, this practice operates independently of the institutional archaeology and do not rely on academic archaeological source. In other side of the study, through the participant observation, it was possible to identify the transmission of these narratives and reflection on the pharaonic past take place primarily in the domestic sphere, a space largely shaped and sustained by women. In this sense, women emerge as the main articulators of the collective memory related to the pharaonic past. Their narratives, their practices, and the space from which they are transmitted constitute the core of the local construction of the past and the memory. However, as I previously mentioned, conventional archaeological practice remains disconnected from the local realities, reproducing both colonial and gender dynamics of exclusions. And for this reason, I think it's essential to integrate local conception of the past into archaeological practice and to recognize women as legitimate producers of the knowledge. Placing the narratives of Egyptian women as the center of the analysis constitute a form of restitution in response to their historical invisibilization and recognize this experience as a meaningful way of valuing archaeological heritage. So I would like to finish to thanks of the people who participated in my study, and thank you very much for your attention.